One-armed jackleg or not, I'm a man, he said with a sullen dignity, even if I ain't a whole one. I got, he said, tapping his knuckles on the floor to emphasize the immensity of what he was going to say, a moral intelligence. And his face pierced out of the darkness into a shaft of door light, and he stared at her as if he were astonished himself at this impossible truth. The old woman was not impressed with the phrase. I told you you could hang around and work for food, she said, if you don't mind sleeping in that car yonder. Why, listen, lady, he said with a grin of delight. The monks of old slept in their coffins. They wasn't as advanced as we are, the old woman said. The next morning he began on the roof of the garden house, while Lucy Nell, the daughter, sat on a rock and watched him work. He had not been around a week before the change he had made in the place was apparent. He had patched the front and back steps, built a new hog pen, restored a fence, and taught Lucy Nell, who was completely deaf and had never said a word in her life, to say the word bird. The big, rosy-faced girl followed him everywhere, saying, bird, the bird, and clapping her hands. The old woman watched from a distance, secretly pleased. She was ravenous for a son-in-law. Mr. Shiflett slept on the hard, narrow back seat of the car, with his feet out the side window. He had his razor and a can of water on a crate that served him as a bedside table, and he put up a piece of mirror against the back glass and kept his coat neatly on a hanger that he hung over one of the windows. In the evenings, he sat on the steps and talked while the old woman and Lucy Nell rocked violently in their chairs on either side of him. The old woman's 3 mountains were black against the dark blue sky and were visited off and on by various planets and by the moon after it had left the chickens. Mr. Shiflett pointed out that the reason he had improved this plantation was because he had taken a personal interest in it. He said he was even going to make the automobile run. He had raised the hood and studied the mechanism, and he said he could tell that the car had been built in the days when cars were really built. You take now, he said, one man puts in one bolt, and another man puts in another bolt, and another man puts in another bolt, so that it's a man for a bolt. That's why you have to pay so much for a car. You're paying all those men. Now, if you didn't have to pay but one man, you could get you a cheaper car, and one that had had a personal interest taken in it, and it would be a better car. The old woman agreed with him that this was so. Mr. Shiflett said that the trouble with the world was that nobody cared or stopped and took any trouble. He said he never would have been able to teach Lucy Nell to say a word if he hadn't cared and stopped long enough. Teach her to say something else, the old woman said. What do you want her to say next? Mr. Shiflett asked. The old woman's smile was broad and toothless and suggestive. Teach her to say sugar pie, she said. Mr. Shiflett already knew what was on her mind.
Let's pause for a second right there and ask, what is already on her mind? Can you figure out what's going on already? A prediction here of what's up. Why would a mother want her daughter, who is obviously mentally challenged and has all other kinds of physical challenges, to be able to learn how to say sugar pie? So you can already kind of get a sense of maybe what's going on here. And again, we're back to that term grotesque, right? Let's go.
The next day, he began to tinker with the automobile, and that evening he told her that if she would buy a fan belt, he would be able to make the car run. The old woman said she would give him the money. "You see that girl yonder?" she asked, pointing to Lucy Nell, who was sitting on the floor a foot away, watching him, her eyes blue even in the dark. "If it was ever a man wanted to take her away, I would say, 'No man on earth is going to take that sweet girl of mine away from me.' But if he was to say, 'Lady, I don't want to take her away, I want her right here,' I would say, 'Mister, I don't blame you none. I wouldn't pass up a chance to live in a permanent place and get the sweetest girl in the world myself. You ain't no fool,' I would say." "How old is she?" Mr. Shiflett asked casually. 15, 16, the old woman said. The girl was nearly 30, but because of her innocence, it was impossible to guess. "It would be a good idea to paint it, too," Mr. Shiflett remarked. "You don't want it to rust out." "We'll see about that later," the old woman said. The next day, he walked into town and returned with the parts he needed and a can of gasoline. Late in the afternoon, terrible noises issued from the shed, and the old woman rushed out of the house, thinking Lucy Nell was somewhere having a fit. Lucy Nell was sitting on a chicken crate, stamping her feet and screaming, "Bird! Bird!" But her fuss was drowned out by the car. With a volley of blasts, it emerged from the shed, moving in a fierce and stately way. Mr. Shiflett was in the driver's seat, sitting very erect. He had an expression of serious modesty on his face, as if he had just raised the dead. That night, rocking on the porch, the old woman began her business at once. "You want you an innocent woman, don't you?" she asked sympathetically. "You don't want none of this trash." "No, I don't," Mr. Shiflett said. "One that can't talk," she continued, "can't sass you back or use foul language. That's the kind for you to have, right there." And she pointed to Lucy Nell, sitting cross-legged in her chair, holding both feet in her hands. "That's right," he admitted. "She wouldn't give me any trouble." "Saturday," the old woman said. "You and her and me can drive into town and get married." Mr. Shiflett eased his position on the steps.
So we've got basically what going on here? A bargain, right? Mom is making a bargain basically with this man. By the way, identify his interesting name and why the name maybe is going to suggest something is going to happen at the end of this story. What is this guy's obsession? Obviously what? The car, right? What is Mom's obsession? Obviously trying to find somebody who will live and take care of her daughter and maybe even her, right? So you've got this really grotesque kind of exchange going on, this bargain going on between these two characters with Lucy Nell, the mentally challenged girl, sitting there on the floor. Let's keep going.
"I can't get married right now," he said. "Everything you want to do takes money, and I ain't got any." "What you need with money?" she asked. "It takes money," he said. "Some people do anything anyhow these days, but the way I think, I wouldn't marry no woman that I couldn't take on a trip like she was somebody. I mean, take her to a hotel and treat her. I wouldn't marry the Duchess of Windsor," he said firmly, "unless I could take her to a hotel and give her something good to eat. I was raised that way, and there ain't a thing I can do about it. My old mother taught me how to do." "Lucy Nell don't even know what a hotel is," the old woman muttered. "Listen here, Mr. Shiflett," she said. sliding forward in her chair. "You'd be getting a permanent house and a deep well and the most innocent girl in the world. You don't need no money. Let me tell you something. There ain't any place in the world for a poor, disabled, friendless, drifting man." The ugly words settled in Mr. Shiflet's head like a group of buzzards in the top of a tree. He didn't answer at once. He rolled himself a cigarette and lit it, and then he said in an even voice, "Lady, a man is divided into two parts, body and spirit." The old woman clamped her gums together. "A body and a spirit," he repeated. "The body, lady, is like a house. It don't go anywhere. But the spirit, lady, is like an automobile, always on the move, always—" "Listen, Mr. Shiflet," she said. "My well never goes dry, and my house is always warm in the winter, and there's no mortgage on a thing about this place. You can go to the courthouse and see for yourself. And yonder under that shed is a fine automobile." She laid the bait carefully. "You can have it painted by Saturday. I'll pay for the paint." In the darkness, Mr. Shiflet's smile stretched like a weary snake waking up by a fire. After a second, he recalled himself and said, "I'm only saying a man's spirit means more to him than anything else. I would have to take my wife off for the weekend without no regards at all for cost. I got to follow where my spirit says to go. I'll give you $15 for a weekend trip," the old woman said in a crabbed voice. "That's the best I can do."
All right, let's pause for a second. Jot down again at level 1. What do you think is going to happen at the end of this story? So we've got negotiations going on here, right? And we've got a mom who is saying about her daughter, if you'll marry her, you get everything. You get the house, you get the car, you get everything. His response is, "Yeah, but I want to be able to like take her somewhere nice. I need some money for that." Her bargain is, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you get some money so that way you can have a little bit of a getaway." Again, what do you think is going to happen at the end of this story? Your predictions, right? Here we go.
"That wouldn't hardly pay for more than the gas in the hotel," he said. "It wouldn't feed her." $17.50, the old woman said. "That's all I got, so it isn't any use you trying to milk me. You can take a lunch." Mr. Shiflet was deeply hurt by the word milk. He didn't doubt that she had more money sewed up in her mattress, but he had already told her he was not interested in her money. "I'll make that do," he said, and rose and walked off without treating with her further.
Notice treating with her further. The deal is done. Fine. We'll deal with it. Hey, jump over to page 1021 really quickly. Southern regionalism. Let's read this from the American experience really quickly, just to get a sense of what's going on here. While writers have the capacity to invent whole new worlds, they are human beings who are influenced by their environments. Regional writers are those who use specific geographical areas, usually their home turf, as settings. Yet, regionalists do more than simply set their fiction in familiar locales. They incorporate the distinct culture of an area, including characteristic speech patterns, customs, beliefs, history, folklore, into the very fabric of their stories. We saw this, of course, when we were studying Faulkner's Rose for Emily as a classic example. This marriage of place, sensibility, and style goes beyond mere reporting to present a sophisticated treatment of the culture of a region. With the best regional writers, local details help to create stories of universal impact. You need not be from the American South to appreciate the work of such great Southern regional writers as Flannery O'Connor, who we're reading, Truman Capote, Carson McCullers, Tennessee Williams, William Faulkner, who we just mentioned, Eudora Welty, who we read, Worn Path, and Robert Penn Warren. The Connecticut literature, what details in the story reflect a Southern sensibility? Could the story be set in a different region? And please explain one way or the other, right? Just to make you think. All right, here we go. Let's go back to the end of the story. You've already predicted what you think is going to happen. Let's see if your predictions are dead on right or no.
Saturday, the three of them drove into town in the car that the paint had barely dried on, and Mr. Shiflett and Lucy Nell were married in the ordinary's office while the old woman witnessed. As they came out of the courthouse, Mr. Shiflett began twisting his neck in his collar. He looked more... The Life You Save May Be Your Own.
I'm sorry, we got to find the...
By Flannery O'Connor. The old woman.
We'll come back here in a second so we can make sure we get the place correct.